Hey Amazon selling enthusiast, it's Eric here. And if you're tired of the inventory management struggle, I've got a game changer for you. InventoryLab.com. Inventory Lab simplifies e-commerce, inventory management, integrates seamlessly with Amazon, and even syncs effortlessly with QuickBooks for hassle-free accounting. Go to Milwaukee Mafia/IL now because your success deserves efficient inventory management. Happy selling.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to a special episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric Walterkins.
I'm Gavin Schmidt.
And today we are joined with a very special guest, which I will turn it over to Gavin to introduce. So Gavin, take it away.
Yeah, so for this episode, Eric's going to kind of sit in the background, be the engineer. Maybe he'll jump in here or there, but mostly just in the background, because we have a special guest this time, a man who reached out to me to be on the podcast, and how could I say no to that? His name is Alberto Vallejo, and Berta was from the age of 13. He was a member of the Latin Kings organization in Milwaukee. He rose up to actually be one of the leaders, both in Milwaukee and regionally. So this guy's seen some crap. So definitely a one-of-a-kind interview you're going to hear today. Berto, introduce yourself.
Oh, how's it going, fellas, first of all? So not to throw a curveball, but yes, I definitely was a member of the Latin Kings for a long time. And I did rise up the ranks, not quite to the regional level, but I was connected with the regional guys, and I did have connections with those guys, and I met with those guys pretty regularly. So, I mean, that'll be something I can get into, but definitely a very interesting lifestyle, and I look forward to sharing it with you guys.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, basically, when I didn't mean like you were in the region. I know like you weren't in like the Chicago area, but you were what you call the active Inca of your chapter, your subchapter. So you were in communication regularly with the other cities, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I just know that there's some guys in situations like this that like to over embellish a little bit, man. And I'm as straight as they come. So I definitely was an active Inca at the time. So I did have conversations with a lot of important guys that were on the region. So without a doubt, that is 100% true.
Okay, so we're going to step it back a little bit. Even though I'm somebody who knows quite a bit about crime and quite a bit about Wisconsin, I actually knew very little just a few weeks ago about the almighty Latin King nation or the Latin Kings or a number of other variations. And so I'm guessing a lot of listeners also know very little. Can you tell us like where in Milwaukee this group is or was, and what other parts of Wisconsin might we find them?
Okay, so now keep in mind I've been away from the organization for quite a number of years. I actually became a Latin King in 2001. So when I was around, there was primarily 4 subchapters: the 19th Street Latin Kings, which is where I was from, 23rd Street Latin Kings, the Wild Walkers, and then the Sawyers. So those were the 4 recognized chapters in Milwaukee. We also have chapters in Delavan, Racine, Kenosha, and these are all a part of our overall region. But so Milwaukee was a hub of Wisconsin, obviously because it's the inner city. Basically, when I was around, we had a pretty good hold on, I would say, the south side of Milwaukee. But before I get in that, how do you want me to really? What would you really like me to indulge when it comes to as far as the chapters and the subchapters? Is there a specific way you would like me to address that question?
Well, I'm not sure. So you've got the 4 groups in Milwaukee, and I know you've said to me that some have more prestige than others, but you're all on the same side.
Right. Right.
Is there like an overarching group that oversees these 4, or are they all sort of semi-independent? How does this work?
Right. Okay. So internally, obviously, from the outside looking in, we're one whole, we're one entity, right? We're Latin Kings. But internally, right, there was sort of a hierarchy within the chapters because there was sub chapters that did a lot more dirt, which is, they put in more work when it came to, violence in the street or producing money. And so they had a little bit more prestige to them. 19th Street, where I was from, was the cream of the crop. I mean, you got, a lot, if you researched our indictment, I mean, the cornerstone of our indictment was because of the 19th Street Latin King. So, and that's no disrespect to anybody that was on there, but, a lot of the guys they were throwaways. They were pieces of the puzzle that were window dressing to make it look bigger than it really was. It was about 19th Street and it was about the violence. As far as the connections, yes, definitely it grew bigger. Okay, so within each subchapter, you have an Inca, which is the leader, and then you have a Cacinca, which is the second in charge. Those two positions universally are voted upon if they need to be filled. So if, there was an instance, I've been a part of one before where your leaderships get locked up at the same time. Your Inca and your Cacinca go in and they go away. Well, then the remaining members, they vote on those two positions. Ideally, if the Inca is still out and the Cacinca gets locked up, a lot of times the Inca is awarded the ability to just pretty much handpick his Cacinca because that's his right-hand man. That's the person who's going to be making a lot of decisions with him. The Inca has the overall say, so he has the final say. And then it moves on to the enforcer. The enforcer is an appointed position by the Inca, and the Cacinca has some say so as well. His job is exactly what it sounds like. He's the enforcer. He enforces all the rules. This guy in this position usually has to have, an edge, and he usually has to have not a favoritism bone in his body, because you'll hear about a lot about that in my story. But his job is to basically call it across the board even, give out violations, make sure guys are paying dues. And with regard to dues, the next position will be the treasurer. The treasurer is somebody who handles all the money, make sure the dues are paid, and at the end of the day, make sure the kickback is ready for the Chicago guys, because ultimately that's where it goes. Chicago is the motherland. That's where it originated, and that's where the ultimate orders come from. Okay, so those are the main positions. When you get into a situation where you have a lot of members in a chapter, which we did at one time, you get what they call a crown council. And a crown council is basically, it's about 7 members, and they're just regular soldiers. They don't have any supreme rank. They're regular soldiers with the exception of the chairman. The chairman is the head of the crown council, and he has some rank. He's not necessarily, I would say, on par with the Inca or Cacinca, but he has some prestige to him, because when there's an issue within the nation, within each other, right, it would go in front of the crown council and be voted on almost like a jury. And the chairman would make a final decision, and he would bring it to the Inca, and then the Inca would make a final decision. And when I say final decision, that could be anything from a violation for somebody, or they could be ordered to get killed. Me personally, I haven't been involved in one of those orders, but I've heard of it happening. So the chairman plays a big role. But like I said, that happens a lot of times when there's a lot of members in the chapter. I guess fortunately and unfortunately, throughout my membership, there wasn't a lot of times where we had enough members to have the Crown Council, as well as all the positions filled, as well as active soldiers. There was on and off, but you got to remember, in this lifestyle, so many guys are in and out of jail, in and out of prison, in and out of DT, which is detention center, in and out of juvie. So it's really hard to maintain the same structure over a period of time. And that carries over. That carries up the chain. So once you get past the subchapters, it goes to a regional level where you have the same kind of structure, an Inca, a Cacinca, an enforcer, and that's a regional position. Those guys are really, really powerful. And then it even goes even higher to what they call a Supreme Inca or a Corona. And those guys are untouchable, and all the way up to the founders, which is Lord Gino and BK or Baby Ray. Those were the 2 who founded the gang. So yeah, it's like a big company. It's like a big organization. You have the owner, the CEO. You have all these moving parts, and it's really, really, it's intriguing and fascinating if you think about how quickly it has to adapt and morph because of the ongoing ins and outs and indictments and and it changes often. But go ahead if you had a question for that.
Yeah, Eric's got something.
I've actually got a question. So you were talking about like the founders and stuff like that. Now, did you have founders in Milwaukee, or are these, because it sounded like you said that a lot of the orders came from the Chicago Latin Kings.
Okay.
Did I understand that right?
Well, when I mean orders in general wouldn't come from Chicago because they don't understand the demographics of Milwaukee. Maybe I misspoke. When I say orders, I mean a lot of the, the dues that we have to pay, or, are these guys what they call on count, right? So, everybody's name is recognized through basic, like a universal ledger. Now it used to be literally written down. Obviously things have changed over the years, and that's not smart to do anymore. But your name has to be recognized in Chicago in order for you to be a Latin King, period. So when I say, orders, that's what I mean. I mean, there's a certain line that you have to walk that has to be okay with those guys down there. As far as orders within Milwaukee, those are going to come from within its subchapters. There's no way for Chicago to know about anything that's going on. But yes, to circle back to what you asked, Eric, there are definitely founders of the subchapters, right? Because in '98, in the indictment, this was one of the major downfalls of the Latin Kings in '98. Okay, so in '98, the Latin Kings also got indicted, and I had an older cousin who was in that indictment. I was just a little kid, but I mean, obviously, I knew of it. And so, what they decided to do prior to the '98 indictment is they combined all the subchapters that were in Milwaukee and made it one chapter. It was called the Chicago Latin Kings. And that was the biggest mistake they could have made, because what they did essentially was, instead of having separate entities and being able to monitor individuals and individual chapters, they brought it all into one. And now it's hard to see somebody who slips through the crack with a wire on, or anybody that's trying to inform on you. So it really made them vulnerable. And that's how they ended up getting indicted in '98. So needless to say, after that indictment happened, the chapter split back up. So the founder of our chapter of 19th Street is a guy named Champ. I won't give you his real name, but anybody who listens to this podcast who knows that name Champ, they'll know exactly who I'm talking about. He had somebody who was with him, who was kind of a co-founder. His name was Boy. Obviously I'm on the other side of these guys now, right? And we'll get into that as time goes on. But I have nothing but respect for these two guys. I mean, these guys were solid guys, in and out. They'll bend over backwards for you. Unfortunately, they just live and die by the sword that is the Latin Kings, and that's where their loyalty lies. As far as 23rd Street, I'm not really familiar who founded them. Wild Walker was basically they were basically guys that fell away from Chicago and turned into Wild Walker. There wasn't really a founder, so to speak, because Wild Walker was right down the block from where Chicago Hood was. It was actually the closest to that neighborhood. So that's why a lot of those guys just kind of migrated over there. Sawyer it's actually a Chicago subchapter. The Sawyer Latin Kings are from Sawyer 30 in Chicago, and one of the guys came up and started the chapter, had permission to start the chapter up in Milwaukee. So that's kind of how the four chapters, I guess, were originated or founded.
Okay. So I've got a couple of different directions I can go here. One thing that I found really interesting is the guy at the top of the organization. If I'm not mistaken, he's been in prison since before you or I were born. And he's still running it, right?
Yeah. I mean, from everything I know, I mean, listen, that guy, he's one, he has so many restrictions on who he can actually talk to and what he can actually say to people, because of the fact that, yes, he still has that supreme chokehold, so to speak, on the Latin King. He's been in prison. He was going to get out, I think, one time. I want to say in '98, he was going to get out of, I believe it was Pontiac, and right before he was about to get out, he got indicted. And and the irony here is that it was right around the same time that the Latin Kings in Milwaukee got indicted. So there was there was a handful of guys that got indicted in Milwaukee that actually got to meet him. They were in prison with him or county jail, whatever it is, holdover basically until, they went away. But so I mean, that's a treat for a lot of guys. I mean, you want to talk about, meeting your biggest idol, like that's what it was for guys at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I understand the timeline, I mean, there are probably grandsons of people that he knew in the organization that he's never met them because he's not been on the outside. So that just
Right.
blows my mind that he can run everything from that way.
Right. Well, and listen, here's the thing, right? And I think I spoke with you about this a little bit, but and which is something obviously I'll get into more with my own story. But the Latin Kings as a whole, man, is a great. It's a great. Um, it's just a great way to draw people in, and the manifesto that Lord Gino, was the founder, and BK wrote, it has a lot of really, really intriguing philosophy, and there's a lot of dignity in what he wrote. And I believe that people that are looking for a purpose, and people that are lost, and people that are looking for something to grab onto can be sold. And I'm talking about smart people, not just dumb kids that are lost. I'm talking about smart people because, not just the philosophies that are in it as a Latino, um, but the propaganda behind it. I mean, the way it unites people and brings them together is really, really, I mean, you want to talk about a, a sense of empowerment, right? Like, I could never replicate the feelings that I got when I was becoming a Latin King, when I was meeting Latin Kings, when I was growing up in the ranks. You can never replicate that, man. I mean, and you can be whatever kind of powerful billionaire you want to be, but to have grown men, you know, 40, 50 grown men at a time stand up when you walk into the room to show you respect, you can't get that anywhere. And
Hmm.
so when you get propaganda based black and gold colors and gang signs and like that's the reason why people say I'll die for this, because it sucks you in. And don't get me wrong, they prey on people that are lost, but it's definitely a two-way street. You get sucked in, and then you kind of get to sold this dream about this brotherhood, and then you start to really believe it because obviously you get introduced to the manifesto and you think that you're really living for a cause. You're really searching for a cause, and you're really living for it. So I mean, I think that's an intriguing part of it to me personally. Obviously now from the outside looking in, I can see why, aside from, you know, the camaraderie that initially drew me in, I can see why I became so loyal to it.
Yeah, and you kind of brought up where I was going to go with the other question is that there is this manifesto and there is a constitution. Like I'm not familiar enough with how other organizations work, but like I'm mostly familiar with the Mafia, obviously, from this podcast, but they don't have anything like that. I mean, they've got rules, but nothing that formal.
Right.
I'm just impressed that anybody who signs up, like, they know exactly what the rules are, they know exactly what they're there for. It's everything's laid out.
Right, right. Yeah, and so the manifesto, I mean, forgive me, right? I memorized a lot of this. You got to remember, this was my life, but it
Hmm.
has been over probably 16 years since I actually had my hands on one. I remember a lot of the manifesto and just what it, I mean, and this is, you want to talk about a precious, like this is an article that was treated like a Bible, or, it was really, really, it was put on a scale. I mean, when you held it, first of all, when you read the first page and you turned to the next one where you couldn't turn back, I mean, there's a certain way you had to approach it and read it. Soldiers could only read the first part of it. There was two parts. The second part was for people in leadership. So it was really, really, I mean, just very, very tedious in how you had to apply it to yourself and your life. And I mean, I remember the King's Prayer. I still know that by heart. Like I told you, the Almighty Latin King Nation is an acronym. Um,
Hmm.
each each letter actually represents a word. There's 5 points, which is love, honor, obedience, sacrifice, and righteousness. So those are principles that you live by. There's a lot of philosophy that you learn. There's different quotes. I want to say in different quotes from like nostalgic people, that I believe were like rewrote and inserted into certain areas of the manifesto. And obviously the rules and the Constitution. that's the main part that everybody focuses on, because that's the part that gets you in trouble, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the part that's going to get you in prison. A lot of what I focused on, and I don't know, maybe it was natural for me, is the Constitution it just came naturally. I didn't need to study it, right? Like, I mean, that was just who I was, so I didn't have to learn it. But the other stuff is what intrigued me. The other stuff is what I wanted to know. I wanted to understand what my cause was, what I was willing to die for. And so, yeah, I mean, the manifesto in itself is really, really complex, and it's really, really dynamic. And, if you had questions about specifically what I remembered, I could give it to you. I mean, it's like I said, some of it's a little foggy, but I do remember a lot of it.
Okay. So just to kind of continue on that, you're talking about the cause, and now, if you're on the outside of the organization, if you're me, Eric, and we're sitting out here, just two dumb white guys, to us, like, Latin Kings is, it's a drug dealing organization. It's drive-by shootings with rival gangs. We don't see that other side of it. Can you kind of give us an idea of what the cause was?
Okay, that's a good point. I mean, that's I guess that's the evolution of the Latin Kings, right? So obviously this is before my time, when there wasn't violence, and primarily what it was about strengthening the Latino community. There's a lot of things in our manifesto that you see how that naturally happens. I said "R," and I'm not a Latin King no more, but that naturally happens. But there's a lot of things in the manifesto that they promote good, right? So don't get me wrong. I'm going to tell you what it is. That doesn't mean they follow it. But you're not supposed to sell heroin and drugs in your neighborhood, in your community. Kids are supposed to be in school. It's all about helping your fellow Latino in any way. So, I mean, I mentioned to you, there was some of that in what we did. Like, if we had money in our due box and somebody's family needed rent money and they couldn't afford it, we would give it. So there's little things like that. But primarily when it started, from my understanding, and I never seen it, but it was based on that. It was based on camaraderie. It was based on strengthening the community. And then what it turns into, the evolution of it, it becomes about power that transforms people. Because, if you have a group of guys and one guy wants to be more powerful than the other guy, and now there has to be sides taken, and that guy leaves, now he's going to start his own thing, right? And so when he starts his own thing, now that turns into another gang or another street, and now they want war with the guys that they left because they felt they were wrong, and vice versa. And that kind of has a snowball effect, and it trickles down and down. I can almost guarantee that a lot of, especially the gangs on the south side of Milwaukee, obviously it's different now, but when I was around, there was Spanish Cobras, different kind of subchapters of Spanish Cobras. There was the La Familia. They were primarily on like 8th and Washington. I believe they started from the Lopez family that used to sell large quantities of cocaine on the south side. The 2-1s was 21st and Scott. That was actually a chapter of Latin King. The guy that started that chapter was a Latin King. His name was Polo. And then they have the MPs, which is the Mexican posse. Them ones I wouldn't say is intertwined as how I'm about to bring this together. But my point is that a lot of those gangs, they formed from being with Latin Kings or being with members or groups before they even became Latin Kings or became Spanish Cobras. They were friends. I can't tell you how many times I ran into some of the older guys when I was around and say, "Oh yeah, I know this Cobra, man. We used to be best friends." The guy 2-1 Polo and the guy I told you that started 19th Street Champ, they were like best friends. They used to box together at UCC, the community center. I mean, these guys knew each other forever, and they just ended up splitting because differences. And that's kind of where the rivalry starts. That's where the violence starts, and then it progresses. Now it's about getting money, right? So now it's about you stepping on my toes. You're trying to take my money. I'm trying to take your money, and there's not enough money to split, right? So it just kind of snowballs and it evolves into this basically this revolving door of emptiness. I mean, it's a hoax now what the Latin Kings stand for. And, obviously I'm going to get blowback on, the reality is this is the truth. And these are truths that are out there. They may be unspoken truths amongst these guys, but, the world sees it, the community see it. It's garbage. What the cause that was once believed in is so far removed that it's a joke. And that's just a matter. It's a fact.
I'm curious. So would you say, based on like what you've talked about with the Constitution and some of the beliefs of the Latin Kings, did this group originally start out not at all in a violent way, but more as something to help the Latino community become, I guess, have a community, I guess.
Yeah. And
does that make sense? And that's where
I definitely agree. I definitely believe that, and it was the oppression of Latinos. You want to talk about minorities in bad positions? Yeah, that's what it was about. That's what it was. It was an empowerment. It was a movement, about empowerment and empowering the Latino community. And there's a lot of families that still believe in that. There's a lot of families that are strong, strongly intertwined, so to speak, but they're not a part of the violence. But they believe in taking care of each other. And if you ever been around a traditional Mexican family, I'm half Mexican, I'm half white. If you've ever been a traditional Mexican family, they'll bend over backwards for you. And that's kind of what the origin was. And to some extent, I believe that there are definitely some maybe grandmas. You got to remember, it's the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. Some grandmas and mothers that are, they still believe in that. They still believe in empowering each other. So yeah, I believe that to some extent, man. But like I said, it only takes one drop of poison, and you dip it in the water, and the whole water is polluted now. Kind of how it goes.
Well, and basically how you've described it, I would say, this very much sounds very similar to the Mafia. Because the Mafia very much started the same way, where they were just about empowering the Italian community, but then turned into more of a crime organization later on as things went along. So I think that's a natural evolution for this type of thing to follow.
Right. That's a good point. I think me and Gavin touched on that a little bit too. Like, I try to find parallels between the Mafia and just the Latin Kings, the organization that it is. And I guess the biggest distance and the biggest difference would be the people that they hurt. Ironically, they both represented strengthening their community and their race, so to speak, and them are the main people that they killed. So,
irony there.
Yeah, there's a twist there, right? And it's the same thing, right? Nobody doesn't have blood on their hands. The Latin Kings, they unfortunately they don't. A lot of times they're not killing Latin Kings, but they are killing other members of the community. That a lot of times, where I'm from, the South Side, when I was growing up, was weird, but it was almost segregated. How the South Side, the Milwaukee is, it's separated by viaducts, the North Side and the South Side. And the North Side was primarily African American, and the South Side was primarily Spanish and white people. So
that hasn't changed.
Yeah. So when the gangs are shooting at each other, they're shooting at their own people. And with the Mafia, obviously they have, they kill each other more than they kill people that are outside of the Mafia. So yeah, I found that definitely a twist of irony there.
All right. So I have a question about the idea of going to war. What makes that? What brings that on? Why is it time? Why did somebody become a target, or why does another group become a target? Is it just something you do every so often automatically, or does something have to spark another round of it? What brings that on?
War tends to happen for the stupidest reasons, man. For the stupidest reasons. And the majority of the time, it's, and these, listen, okay, so Latin Kings, they don't have allies, right? When I was coming up, they had very few, right? So there are certain gangs on the South Side that they associate with each other. They have no problem with it. Well, Latin Kings don't have allies, and it's primarily because of what I'm about to tell you right now, right? Why wars start. They usually start at a house party when some guy walks and bumps into another guy, and they're from different gangs, but they're supposed to be there together. And now it's a who's tougher competition. And a lot of times, man, a lot of times, I don't want to glorify it, but listen, the Latin Kings were the supreme organization on the South Side, and I think anybody that's got any kind of sense will admit that. And so a lot of times, man, those guys, they usually get beat down, shot, they get the worst end of it. And now that turns into a war, because some of those guys, they go back and they have friends, and their friends have guns, and their friends aren't scared of the Latin Kings, because just like the Latin Kings got guns and guys that ain't scared, that exists in other gangs. So that's where it starts, and nobody knows why it continues, right? So, you got futures that come in. I might come in when I come in as a Latin King. They might say, man, we're really, really heavy at war with the Spanish Cobras. I don't say why. I just say, okay, and that's so, and, I'll touch on this, but one of my best friends was actually killed by a Spanish Cobra. That sparked the war, right? I mean, sure. We're already looking to, obviously we don't care, we shot at Cobras on a regular, but when you kill one of ours, now it intensifies it, right? Now it grows. That time that you're at the store and you see one and you just, you look the other way, those times don't exist anymore. Now you're always active. So that's kind of the way war works, man. There's really it's not the game of risk. You don't scheme it up and then it plays out the way you want it to. It kind of just organically, man, it happens for stupid reasons, and then it continues on for even dumber reasons, So
yeah, we weren't going to talk about like your personal story until like the next time we do this, but just it kind of ties in. I mean, I believe you told me you were shot the first time. I don't know if you were shot multiple times, but you were shot the first time when you were 13, and I'm guessing you probably didn't even know why.
Right. So yeah, I was 13. I was the only time I got shot, thankfully. But yeah, I got shot when I was 13, and it took some hard investigating. But I actually found out it was a Cobra who shot me as well. And yeah, I mean, that's one of those instances. I mean, I literally just spoke it 2 seconds ago, but that's what I was talking about. When I came in, they tell you, hey, we're at war with the Spanish Cobras. Make sure you're on point. Okay. Well, I learned really fast that your head should be on a swivel. That was a life lesson.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because I'm guessing that first time that you're the victim of a drive-by, you don't even know what sparked it at that point.
Is there something that brings these wars to an end, or is it just they kind of fizzle out and the anger is gone or whatever? Does something have to happen?
I think the best answer would be that they usually fizzle out when the guys who are active war participants go to prison, because
really,
because in every gang you have the guys that really, really enjoy war, or they live for war, and you have the guys that are not so much like that. And obviously, obviously the guys that enjoy war are more prone to get caught for, shooting guns. So they end up going down. The guys that aren't, they end up staying around. They end up staying out. So, and that's how they fizzle out. That's how they kind of die down until they have another group of guys that come up and are really interested in war. So that's kind of how it goes, man. There's no really rhyme or reason for it. That's just the way it is.
I'm actually pretty good with this segment, Eric. You've been pretty active this hour. You got another question for him?
I don't think so right now. No.
Okay, that's like because we just wanted to kind of cover the generals of the organization, and I feel like we did pretty good. Unless Alberto, you think there's something we forgot?
Yeah, no. As an overview, I think we did pretty well. I guess anything else can kind of be glossed over as we go along.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, more is going to come up as we go, but
yeah, can't think of anything glaring that needs to be out there for the listeners. I think they can have a good gist of where to go.
We'll wrap this episode up. If you guys enjoy this podcast, please leave us feedback on your favorite podcast player. Gavin, you want to hit them with contact info?
Yeah, I can be found at MilwaukeeMafia.com. You can email me, MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook. You can probably find me other places. I'm pretty easy to track down. If you want to talk to Eric for some reason, you can reach him through me. You cannot reach Berto, but he will be back with us on our next segment. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll be back again soon.
But you can certainly reach out to us if you do have questions for Berto, and we'll get them to him.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Any questions? I welcome them all.
All right. Well, this will wrap this episode up. We'll be back in 1 week with the Patreon episode, 2 weeks with a regular Mafia episode. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.